We don't think anything of it when we give up on a TV show or we stop watching a movie. But for some reason, when we start a book, we have to finish it. Mac Engel, Footwear Star Telegram, Engel podcast here on the Sunset Lounge. Great guest for this episode. Seems to be a recurring theme. Tim MacMahon of ESPN.com, NBA reporter, will join me here momentarily to talk about his new book about Luka Doncic. Unbelievable timing, by the way, on this book. Before we get into that, I do want to make sure I give a shout out to everybody on the Sunset Lounge. A reminder that everything on the Sunset Lounge is free. This includes Shippy and Groobs, the Clubhouse featuring Rob, Alex, and Don, pop culture, sports, movies, wrestling. Beer 30 Sports O'Clock featuring Ziggy, all things sports, all things football, mostly football, and a ton of beer. It's a hell of a combination. Al Maximo featuring Victor Villaba, the Spanish voice of the Dallas Cowboys and Dallas Mavericks. I don't know if you knew this or not, but the Dallas Mavericks, they traded Luka Doncic. Carlos Nava, ESPN Deportes, covers NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA, boxing, and soccer. Before I forget, I always forget this one. I don't know why. Because it's not written down on this piece of paper. Your Dark Companion, featuring Mike Reiner. Mike Reiner's Your Dark Companion. All of these shows here on the Sunset Lounge are free. All you have to do is go to the Sunset Lounge and find the free member button, spelled free, F-R-E-E, member, M-E-M-B-E-R, button. Top of the membership page, join, and you can enjoy all of these shows for free. That is patreon.com/SunsetLoungeDFW. That's spelled D as in dog, F as in Frank, W as in W. Patreon.com/SunsetLoungeDFW. Okay, let's get into it. Dallas Mavericks had one of the best basketball players in the world on their roster, Luka Doncic. A prodigy, Mozart with the basketball. Amadeus, unbelievable player. Had him since he came over here from Slovenia, actually by way of Spain, where he was a professional, and he takes over the NBA. One of the best players in the world, and the Mavericks have the rights to him, and he is going to lead them to the basketball promised land, and that is the NBA Finals, where the Mavericks reached last spring when they reached the NBA Finals, but had their asses kicked by the vastly superior Boston Celtics. Didn't matter. Luka was their guy. He was going to be the statue player at some point after his career was over, because it was all going to happen here, just like Dirk Nowitzki. That's how good Luka Doncic is. He was going to be Dirk. And in fact, as great as Dirk Nowitzki is, Luka Doncic is a better player than Dirk at the same point in their career. But Dirk is Dirk, and not everybody is meant to have one career in the same spot as a professional athlete. However, Luka was going to be that guy. Didn't work out that way. Early February, Dallas Mavericks general manager Nico Harrison, a former Nike executive, stuns the world. Not just basketball, not just Slovenia, not just the NBA, the world, when he traded Luka Doncic at 25 to the Los Angeles Lakers in return for center Anthony Davis. There were some other components to the trade. Maxi Kleber, a longtime Dallas Mavericks forward, was included in the trade. The Lakers included a nice role player potentially in Max Christie and a future first-round pick in 2029, I think. But that's really about it. This is the Chicago Bulls trading Michael Jordan at 25. This is the Boston Celtics trading Larry Bird at 25. The Los Angeles Lakers trading Magic Johnson at 25. That is how much the Dallas Mavericks general manager was done with Luka Doncic. I still can't believe it. Well, the man in the middle of this media-wise is Tim MacMahon. Tim MacMahon used to work for the Dallas Morning News for a long time before he eventually moved on to ESPN, where he has become basically renowned for his reporting of all things NBA. Based out of Dallas, a lot of his work focused on the Mavericks because clearly they had been one of the more relevant franchises in that 30-team league for quite a while because of Dirk Nowitzki and the success, along with former Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban. And then certainly when Luka Doncic came to town, they remained a hot team in the NBA. A number of years ago, Tim MacMahon was contracted to write a book about Luka Doncic. And it just so happened that that book came out right when the trade was made. Now, they had to make some adjustments, and Tim had to write an additional chapter. But for all things Luka Doncic and all things Dallas Mavericks regarding this particular trade, Tim has been on the forefront of the reporting on maybe one of the biggest trades in the history of sports. He does have a new book out. It is out now. You can find it out now. The Wonder Boy, Luka Doncic and the Curse of Greatness. You can find it anywhere, Amazon, bookstores, Barnes & Noble, etc. Without further ado, to talk about the book and this trade, please welcome my friend, Mr. Tim MacMahon. All right, Tim. So you and I have talked about this book for years.
Yes.
Take me back. When were you first contracted about writing a book about Luka Doncic? Do you even remember now?
Yeah, it was midway through the 21-22 season.
Oh, wow.
That's when I was approached about the opportunity and,
Mm-hmm.
kind of work through what I thought the book would look like, what I thought I could execute, what I would be interested in writing. And I didn't want to write like this traditional biography about Luca. There's definitely biographical elements of it, but frankly, I said, "Hey, Luca's not gonna wanna, like, sit down with me and cooperate," and, and I understand that, and so my idea was writing this book kind of the premise being there's this pressure on an NBA franchise when it drafts a prodigy and run it through the prism of Luka and the Mavericks, and, so like I said, 21-22 season, that's the year where the KP the Mavericks gave up on the KP trade, and, part of the whole thing was you've gotta have a co-star for him. Then this co-star emerges that you had all along in Jalen Brunson. They go to the West Finals. Well, we know how that played out, but that's something I go over to Slovenia to kinda get a feel for where Luka's from, talk to a lot of people in the Slovenian basketball community, people who had known Luka since he was, an 8-year-old who was known as Sasha's son, his dad being kind of the Charles Barkley, of Slovenia. Followed his team, for group play in Eurobasket to Cologne, Germany, saw him around his national team and all that kinda stuff. The book was supposed to be written, completed by the end of the next summer. And and most of it was, but, the guy who was the VP of the publishing company who, had his name's Sean Desmond, he's actually a Dallas native. He'd worked with Brian Windhurst on when he's written a couple New York Times bestsellers. Chris Herring, another colleague of mine, Blood in the Garden, his book on the Knicks, another New York Times bestseller. Like, he's, done a lot of these things. Well, he left the publishing company. I was 4 chapters in when he left, and so, then they bring in somebody else to be the editor, and they're like, "Well, let's push the deadlines back a few months. File us everything instead of by October 1st. Let's just say," I forgot what the exact date was, but it was midway through the next season. I'm like, "That's like filing a game story in the second quarter." Like, I can't do that. And Mac, thank goodness, because you imagine if this book would have come out last March and think about at the time how the 22-23 season ended. The Mavericks had to tank after the Kyrie trade to keep that top 10 protected pick. It was gloomy, it was doomy. There was this fear that if they don't get this thing right, Luka might be almost forced to ask for a trade, right? He never said that, but that was definitely the fear within the organization and frankly, the anticipation, around the league. Could you imagine if that ending comes out and, oh, boom, here they go, best record in the league down the stretch and off to the finals? It would've been a rough one for me. So instead, there's this nice upbeat, optimistic ending. Lucas just right fresh off the finals, and 8,000 copies are printed when, just after midnight where I am in Cleveland on February 2nd, hey, the Mavericks decided to dump him. So, had to hustle to get a final chapter written. It's not in the early copies, but people who get those can get it sent to them on a PDF, via link, and it was a hell of a way for this tale to end, I'll put it like that.
Did any point before the trade happened, did you go through the process of, God, I just want this to be done. I don't even care if it's bad. I'm sick of it. I've got another job to do. I've got a family. I've got responsibilities. I just want this to be over with. Did you actually get to that point at all?
I cared if it was bad.
Okay. That's
But
good.
but listen, wanting it to be at the finish line, absolutely, and I know you've written books, you can
Yeah.
relate to that, and it's something that I made it very clear, like, this has to be a summer project for him. That's why I originally asked for 2 summers, because 'cause I'm like, I can't work on this during the season. Now, the reporting that I do during the season, is that all used in the book? Obviously, but I couldn't commit time to work specifically on the book, to write the book, during the season as I'm covering the Mavericks, as I'm covering multiple other teams, in the Western Conference. Um, honestly, the only time I worked on this during the season just happened to be in the busiest time of my professional life, which was right after the trade, simply because I had to get a final chapter
Yeah.
that explained what the hell happened, how this shocking plot twist went down, and so for 2 weeks after that trade, I didn't sleep a whole lot.
You take me back to the beginning of this when the Mavericks identified him as a top target, and then they traded whatever they needed to trade on the draft day in order to get him. And then people like me, I don't know if you were guilty of it. I know I was. It was they have found Dirk, and people like me again wanted him to be Dirk desperately.
Yeah, and
And you and I both know Dirk is a one of a kind guy,
sure.
personality wise, all that stuff. Was was he aware? Do you think Luca was aware of that expectation and that burden that this guy, Hall of Fame player who's on his way out, he's going to be that guy
Well,
and he's going to be there for 20 years?
yeah, and so, first of all, they not only traded up to get him, they tanked like hell to be in a position to get him.
Yeah, that's right.
And
Yeah, I
then
forgot about that.
it being the Mavericks lottery luck, got bumped back a couple spots,
Right.
had to trade back up, got fortunate that Vlade Divac, a ball legend, didn't think Luka was a fit in Sacramento or good enough to pick number 1.
Forgot about that.
Oh, I'm sorry, number 2. Number
Yeah.
1, Igor Kososkov, who had coached Luka on the Slovenian national team to the Eurobasket title. The Suns hire him as a head coach and don't wanna hear his opinion about, "Ooh, this guy is the guy we need."
So the one with DeAndre Ayton, the guy who doesn't give a shit about playing basketball.
Yeah, okay, rookie head coach. No, we're drafting the I'm Robert Sarver, Arizona alum. We're taking the big man from Arizona. You
I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. We'll shop for the groceries. And then the Hawks, they had Luka above Trey. If the trade hadn't been made, they would have taken Luka, but they thought it was close enough that getting that extra lottery pick made sense. So the
Wasn't
Mavericks,
that lottery pick Cam Reddish?
it ended up being Cam Reddish.
Okay.
Yeah. And so
All
the
right.
Mavericks tanked to get him, to be in position to get him, had to trade back up and still got very fortunate. And yes, it was, like this storybook thing of the best European of all time passing the baton to a guy who has a chance to kinda take that honor, not take the honor from Dirk, but, to end up being the guy who replaces Dirk, who one-ups Dirk as far as being the best player ever to come out of Europe, and, y pressure, I tell you, I think Luka understood who Dirk was, and certainly after that season with all the pomp and circumstance, 41-21-1, understood what Dirk meant to Dallas and how beloved he was, how appreciative he was. But Luka's not a dude who feels burden of expectations, like that he's not a guy who feels pressure from people wanting him to be great or thinking he should be great because he believes he's great, and he's right. You know, and honestly, the fact that 3 teams passed on him And Luka was very quiet, especially early in his career, never a guy who liked to do much media. But even at that initial press conference, after the 3 teams had passed on him, he's basically, there's a line in the book, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but essentially he said, you know, I like being doubted. If you think I'm gonna be great, cool. If you don't, we'll see. And we've seen.
So the title is The Wonder Boy, Luka Doncic, and the Curse of Greatness. It's a great title. I interviewed him a few times, always in group settings.
Really?
I don't know if you ever got much chance to spend one-on-one time with him at all. But in my impressions of him from those interviews is that the spotlight was not something he was totally comfortable with. And I couldn't tell if it was the spotlight or it was his command of English. Which one was it?
No, the guy, first of all, he speaks 4 languages fluently,
Okay.
and his English has never been an issue. I mean, look, are there times where he kinda struggles to find the exact word? Yes, but his reluctance to, do a lot of media was not about a language barrier. It
Okay.
never was. Certainly, it's never been an issue with his teammates, and he does have, like, a sharp, witty, sarcastic sense of humor. You've seen a little bit of that recently, publicly. See a lot, his teammates see a lot of that behind the scenes, but, I use this comparison in the book, and he's grown out of it, in terms of age, but early in his career, I said he's like the media responsibilities for him were like math homework for most kids his age. He'll do the bare minimum, but he ain't gonna enjoy it, and he sure as
Right.
he's not doing any of it for fun. And so that's always how, and I do think that it's funny. I think Luca loves the stage,
Mhm.
but doesn't necessarily love the fame, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is, Luca doesn't want to do a whole bunch of extra media. And, he doesn't want to do a bunch of like, appearances and all that kind of stuff. He doesn't necessarily love being quote unquote a celebrity, but boy, he loves being in a packed arena with the ball in his hands, you know, pressure. And honestly, I think he loves it more in a road atmosphere. Game 7 in Phoenix, game 5 closing out Minnesota, where he just gets to, snarl at an entire arena, rip the soul out of an entire arena. He loves the stage, but he also he loves the competitive stage like that, and he loves entertaining. Like, and this is something that was so funny. Rick Carlisle was so as early in Luka's career, Rick would always bring up, like, his Instagram. Like, Rick would know how many Instagram followers he had, because Rick felt like Luka was performing for to put together an Instagram highlight reel. But, he loves entertaining. He loves making the pass that makes the entire arena gasp. He loves, the fake where he's got defenders' heads around, next thing you know, he's just laying the ball in. He is a natural showman. Mike Procopio, who's the Mavs player development coach, he's in the book a lot. He's their player development coach's rookie year. I'm also a guy who knows Kobe extremely well. I don't know if you've heard Nico Harrison does.
Yeah.
But it's kind of his claim to fame before this was that he was Kobe's personal scout, for Kobe's last couple championship runs. Unpaid position, but anyways, was the Mavs player development coach. In his own words, he's a short, fat bleep. This wise ass from Boston, the son of a Boston electrician who did most of his work for the mob, and he's got that thick Boston accent,
Okay. Yeah.
sense of humor. Anyways, he nicknamed Luka the Matador, and I always
Yeah.
said it was appropriate for Luka's defense. But
It's true.
it was like a nod to Luka's Spanish roots, obviously, with Real
Mhm.
Madrid, but also just this guy's flair for showmanship. And again, the stage he was all about. A celebrity didn't have has never shown just a ton of interest in that. And it'll be
So,
interesting to see how it goes in Los Angeles because obviously I think Luka probably is understanding just how much opportunity there is,
oh my God.
in terms of a marketing perspective.
Yeah.
Certainly the Jordan brand is having that stay
Yeah.
in Los Angeles.
So when you were starting the process of writing it, I know having done something not on this level, but I remember when I wrote a book on Tony Romo, his agent found out about it and there was some concern. His mom was really mad about it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if in in your process, anybody in Luka's team said, "Hey, what are you doing?" or "We're not going to cooperate," or "We will cooperate." Was there any part of that dialogue that you had through your reporting and interviews that they would say yay or nay to anything?
Oh, certainly.
Did
And,
they?
I mentioned that trip to, Cologne, Germany with the Slovenian national team, and I
Right.
just announced before that trip that, this was a project that I was working on, and I had lunch with Bill Duffy, who's, Luka's agent. Before Luka, he was known to Mavericks fans as Steve Nash's agent. It was an infamous in the wake of, Nash culture. He's the agent who Mark Cuban blasted
That's right.
blogmaverick.com. But, Bill I've got a good relationship with Bill. He's one of the most respected agents in the NBA and has been doing this for a long, long time. And, I mean, it was made clear to me, like, look, and by the way, Luca, when I was in Slovenia and Germany, literally, he didn't make eye contact with me. And it was and Bill made it clear, like, hey, Luca doesn't really want you writing this book. And there was a lot of concern that this was something where I was going to be delving into Luca's personal life.
Yeah.
And I made that clear to Bill that that wasn't the case. Laura Beth Sager, who's Luka's business manager, was Dirk's longtime publicist. Is extremely close with Luka. Actually, is on the Lakers team playing now, because Luka wants her in every game. So I had coffee with her that summer, and again, I made that clear to her. I said, "Look, this is a book. This is a basketball book. It's about the business of basketball through the prism of Luka." I said, "Hey, it's not gonna be altogether flattering. Certainly, I'm gonna have to, deal with stuff like the clash with Carlisle, some of the, uh, conditioning concerns, those kind of things, but we're not this is not me trying to dig into Luka's personal life. This is not me trying to, like, uncover, that sort of thing. I respect that he has a private life, that if he wanted to talk about it, okay. If he doesn't, it's not my place. It's none of my business." And so, and I told them, I said, "Hey, look, if he wants to sit down with me, awesome. But if he doesn't, I understand. And that's not a problem. That's not an issue. His voice will be in the book. It is in the book because obviously I've covered him throughout the course of
Yeah.
my career. It's not like I've never had an opportunity to talk to Luka Doncic. I've had probably thousands of
Yeah.
opportunities, and those are represented there. But honestly, after I made it clear that the book was a basketball book and not a pry into his personal life type of thing, there weren't any issues. I don't think Luke was, like, gonna help me out on a promotional tour or anything. You know
Great, do a signing together.
it's funny, who else tried to talk me out of writing the book at the time when I first
Who's that?
Nico Harrison.
You're, and he wasn't even the GM of the team.
No, he was.
Oh, he
He
was.
was.
Okay. Oh, you're right. He would.
Thank
Sorry, I
thank
got the
you. I
timing wrong.
also Nico was
Why did he care? Oh, yeah. You know what? That doesn't surprise me. What was his logic?
well, he was just like, like, you're gonna be around the team, like, for in his mind, it's like, it was one thing if somebody was parachuting in to do it,
Mhm.
but me being the guy who covered that team on a regular basis, he thought it was weird, and he's like he asked me, he said, "Did you get Luca's permission?" And I said, I'm a journalist. This is a journalistic endeavor. Like, I
Yeah.
get his permission when I write a story on ESPN.com. Like, what's the difference here? Like, it's a different form of media.
Well,
And, again, if you feel like you have to have somebody's permission to be able to write about them, then you probably haven't enjoyed a whole lot of books. There's books that have been written, but because look, if it's he can write his own autobiography at some point if he wants to.
Yep.
He can get somebody to ghostwrite it for him or whatever. This is not a traditional biography. It's certainly not his autobiography. But I do think it is a fair and accurate portrayal of a fascinating 6.5 year run in Dallas. And honestly, I did think as I'm doing this, I thought for a while that this could end with a Luka trade. I just thought it would be
Did you really?
well, because I thought the Mavericks were gonna fail to build a freaking contender around him,
Okay.
and that he would almost again, I never thought Luka would look for reasons to leave. I have a chapter in there that focuses on the Slovenian national team because I think his commitment to his national team, and the fact he plays for Slovenia every single summer and at all, when he had a Spanish passport and could have hopped on a bandwagon when there was talk about him maybe being able to play for Serbia. I think Luka's commitment to the Slovenian national team illustrates that he is naturally a loyal person. I say whatever you want about him. He is naturally a loyal person. Now, I thought there might be just no realistic option for him other than looking elsewhere. Because especially coming off of when they tanked to keep that top 10 protected pick, you imagine there's all kinds of sliding doors moments throughout his tenure. Let me run this scenario by you. The Los Angeles Lakers decide they're targeting Kyrie Irving in free agency. They don't sign D'Angelo Russell and Rui Hachimura. They can't get to the same numbers the Mavericks get, but they can get in the neighborhood. And they can offer Kyrie the opportunity to rejoin LeBron in LA, in that market.
Yep.
And let's say Kyrie pounces on that and leaves the Mavs with a bag of nothing. And Luka looks around. They've blown through assets. They've whiffed on multiple co-star possibilities. They just came off a lottery season. That likely would have resulted in another trip to the lottery. And here's this MVP candidate entering his prime, and they can't even build a playoff team around him? Who would have blamed him if it that
No, nobody.
you know what I'm saying?
And I remember you don't remember the conversation. I remember when they made the trade for Kyrie Irving, and I killed it. And I wasn't alone. It wasn't like I was unique in that position.
Mhm.
But I remember you telling me, Tim, had they not made that trade, when it became available, that when it became known that Kyrie was available, had they not made that trade, he was going to be really pissed
Well,
that they passed on the chance to get talent like that.
yeah, and it's funny because, people call me out for, because
Everything.
Luka's cool, right, but Luke there have been multiple instances in press conference where Luka has expressed displeasure with me, and one of those was just before that trade when I had reported that Luka Doncic had been pushing hard for the Mavericks to make personnel upgrades before the trade deadline. And the news wasn't that Luka didn't think the roster was good enough because no shit.
It wasn't.
Like, I mean, when eyeballs and just a little bit of interest in the NBA realize they lost Brunson for nothing. I mean, Luka's carrying this unbelievable load. Like, yeah, Christian Wood and the and this supporting cast ain't getting.
Dorian Finney-Smith and
I
Spencer
love
Din.
Dodo, but like,
Oh, I know. No, these are good guys. These are good players,
no,
but they're not NBA title.
Christian Wood is a talent. Dodo is a title caliber role player.
Yeah, that.
He's been huge. My point is, if they didn't get a co-star for Luka, dude, this thing was going nowhere fast. And the news wasn't that Luka thought they needed to upgrade the roster. The news was that for the first time in his career, Luka showed interest on being part of the front office discussions because frankly, he had to. It had gotten to the point where, "Oof, what have we done here? Where are we? What we got to do something. We got to get better." And so, but Luka didn't like that. He didn't like the perception of of him not believing in his teammates and kind of that being out there publicly. He doesn't like any of the behind the scenes stuff, to be reported. But it was accurate, and honestly, he was well within his rights. But yeah, if
Oh, absolutely.
they didn't make
Yeah.
their trade for Kyrie, and you're Luka, and you're looking around, and like, how could you not think like, dude,
Yeah, what are we doing?
what are we doing? How am I, this generational talent, going to have any realistic chance to compete for a championship? They did, and it didn't pay any dividends, but certainly last year it did. And that's what's so crazy. They had so many missteps, so much dysfunction, so much drama, and they succeeded in building a contender around him. They succeeded. The man led the league in scoring, averaged damn near a 34-point triple-double last year, led them to the finals, and then before the next trade deadline, they decided to dump him, and there was no threat of Luka looking to leave. It was about to close on his forever home in Dallas and gonna contract in NBA history this summer.
So, okay, take me through your experience with this trade. And I don't know, because I'm sure you've talked about it way more than I have, and I've talked about it a lot. This is one where I still can't believe it, even as I talk about it, even as I continue to talk about it, even as Mavericks employees are baffled when they talk to me about it.
Yeah.
They're like, I cannot believe they did this. There have been times in your career when you covered the Cowboys or Mavericks or other franchises, when they do a deal, when they make a move, when you hear the logic on it, you can say, okay, I don't agree with it, but I get it. There's nothing about this that has allowed me to say, okay, I understand the logic. I can't get this logic other than, and tell me if I'm wrong, this reeks of a massive personality conflict between not the owner, but the general manager and the superstar player. Am I wrong?
Yeah, and look, there's all these conspiracy theories about
Yeah.
Dumont. What happened here is Nico managed up. And look, I don't think that it's, going out on a limb to say Patrick Dumont doesn't know a whole lot about basketball.
No, I think you would admit it.
I'll or you can just listen to his comments.
The math isn't complicated.
And Dumont didn't Mark Cuban got like a 5-minute heads up that this was happening. Try to talk Nico out of it, and Dumont never asked Cuban his opinion. Called him, they talked for like 2 minutes after the trade was done. And by that point,
It's done. It's too late.
but it was Cuban had been completely pushed out. The whole thing about Cuban keeping basketball control, I don't know if Cuban was lying or if he was trying to speak something into existence, but it was not part of the contractual.
Okay, wait a minute. Let me interject something, because I thought you had reported this, and maybe it was Mark Stein, but the way it was told to me was when Mark sold the team in 23, it was done with the idea that he would retain X shares as well as the final authority on basketball operations. And that was going to be a slow process of being phased out over like 5 to 7 years, where his shares would continually dwindle, Tim. And then as the season progressed last spring, he just fast tracked it and sold the vast majority of them, and he no longer had the final say, even if it was, even if it didn't exist anyways, that it was done in 24. Is that correct?
He didn't have the final say from the second the sale went through.
I'll be damned.
He was not
That was just something that was bullshit they just threw out there.
he did. It was not the majority owner. He was not the majority owner.
Yeah, if you're not the majority owner, then you're not the
Cuban
final
was
say.
insistent that the word he used with me, he said he was going to have control of basketball operations forevermore. The reality was he had control of basketball operations nevermore. So, but there's a 0% chance this trade happens if Cuban still has
Right.
influence, much less control. For 6 years under Cuban, the top priority was kissing Luka's butt. And I would say that there was sound strategy in that.
Right. Yeah. Can't blame him.
But for 6 years to stabbing him in his back. That's exactly the way this thing went down. But like, you know, I had reported obviously throughout Luka's career, but earlier this season, I had reported on the concerns about the conditioning and the frustration about the condition. People, thought I was trying to stir stuff up. Like, trust me, when I report on this stuff, I'm selective about it. Like,
Oh yeah.
it's not just, some lower level guys grumbling. Like, I talk to people, I hear things, I see things. There's a threshold for me to even as much as say something about it on the Hoop Collective podcast. When I report that the Mavericks are extremely frustrated with Luka's condition again, trust me, I'm not guessing. I'm not, you know,
In your defense, Tim, other guys that you could sit there and say, well, if you don't trust me, listen to Reggie Miller on a national broadcast on TNT talking about it. This was years ago.
Well,
His conditioning and weight have been concerns. Regardless of whatever you said, other people had said it too,
there were
just watching it.
there were concerns going back to the pre-draft process.
Oh,
Now, guess what? So all that intel ended up being accurate, and he's still one of the most accomplished and productive 26-year-olds now that we've ever seen in the NBA. So I was well aware of the frustration this season in particular because it was like, God, we came out the finals and they felt like they had the best team around them that they've ever had. And especially early this season, when Luka was coming off what they they were misleading calling it a contusion of the calf. There was a strain of his calf that caused him to miss all of training camp and all the preseason. He packed on some pounds during that time, and there was real frustration early in the season of, like, everybody is holding up their end of the bargain except for the guy who's got the biggest responsibility. And Luka's got this incredible, like, Luka can put up 28, 8, and 8 and play like crap. He did it for the first couple months of J Kid's first year. He did it again early on this season. And, so, and then there was the shutdown. He had a wrist injury, but it was one of those things where he's got a little wrist injury and it gives him a good reason to shut him down like they did with the ankle injury in J Kid and Nico's first year. Give him time to work on getting in shape, to shed some weight, and come back off of that. And there was a lot of frustration of, I can't believe we're having to do this shit again, that sort of thing. And then when first of all, Luka came back and he was awesome. And the Mavericks won 14 of 17. And he had that 45-point triple double against the Warriors. It's like, okay, they got that dude back. And talking to people around the league, Oklahoma City had established itself as like the favorite in the West, but everybody thought the Mavericks were going to have a real chance to come out of the West again. Then he goes down on Christmas. It's that calf again. And the reaction, particularly from Nico, but from others, Nico being the most important, wasn't like sympathy or, man, that's tough. It was, this is what happens when a guy doesn't take care of himself. And
Are they right?
well, there was anger. Um, and it was floated to me that, if we've got to trade Luka, we'll do it. And I was like, sure you will. We're just because somebody vents doesn't mean,
Right.
like, you've got to. Could you imagine if I just had sources said the Mavericks are considering trading Luka?
Oh, you've been laughed off the internet.
I mean, it would have been insane. And I honestly thought it was an insane thing to even grumble. Sure enough, like, what was it? 5, 6 weeks later, they actually did
They
it.
did it.
Look, is there
Did you believe it when you found out that when you found out on Saturday, I don't know what time on that Saturday you found out when ESPN reported it? I found out it was 11 o'clock. I didn't believe it. I thought it was like
I
a
I I was able to figure it out pretty quickly, and frankly, I was able to get Nico on the phone like 5
oh,
minutes
that's
later.
right, you did.
So, I didn't wonder for very long. Um, but, you asked, are there legitimate condition concerns? Obviously, yes. Also, listen, man, the guy played 100 something games of basketball in the span of 12 months.
Yep.
Like last season, coming fresh off of the World Cup with Slovenia, you go into training camp. He did have a calf issue during the preseason last year as well. But then, like, think about the load he carried last year, right? And Kyrie missed a large chunk of the season, and Luka had the weight of the franchise on his back and carried it well. Well, like, dude, they were winning games when Kyrie was out with that heel injury. I mean, the dude had 50 points and 15 assists on Christmas night. And, there's a scene in there where Luka comes over, he checks out with whatever, 40 seconds left or whatever it was, just collapsing the bench, and Kyrie's like fanning him. Yeah. Like, and then, you know, you go into the playoffs. This guy, he tweaked his knee in the first round. Then he ended up having to get shots because of the chest thing in the final. He had to take painkilling injections before the last 4 finals games. Did he put on a little bit of weight during the season? Yeah. Was that somewhat of a concern? Sure. He led the playoffs, all players, in points, in rebounds, in assists, in steals, and in minutes. And then went and played in the freaking Olympic qualifiers in
Right.
Slovenia. Now, he was on fumes. Slovenia had no chance because he just wasn't.
He was dead.
I mean, it was almost like, thank goodness they didn't qualify for the Olympics because he needed to rest. But it's hard for me to sit here and tell you, like, God, this guy, it's never going to work with him when he played more minutes last season, regular season and playoffs combined, than anybody in the league. And he did it putting up historic numbers and took this team to the finals. Now, look, he didn't do it single-handedly. There are a lot of factors there, but I d it's I get the frustration. I don't get dumping him midway through the very next season. I don't get making it such a secretive process that you depress the value because you're only negotiating with one team. And frankly, I don't get the fear of the supermax. You're afraid that his body's gonna break down? I promise you this, if Luka Doncic is locked up long term, I don't care how many games he misses this season and next season. If you put him on the trade market when you can trade him on that supermax, announce, "Luka Doncic is on the trade market. We're trading him before trading." You will have the biggest bidding war in NBA history, right? And yeah,
I look at what the Wolves traded to get Rudy Gobert, who's a nice player, defensive player of the year. 100 first-round picks. And Mark Cuban said it in an interview with WFAA. It's not that they traded him; that's what they got in return. Why would they get? And not Anthony Davis is not a bum by any
top
stretch.
75 all-time player.
I can't get over the fact of how little they got in return for a guy who's 25 years old
Well, and
and one of the top 3 players in the world.
right, and, like, I wanna make it clear, like, Anthony Davis is a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Great player.
Top 75 all-time player. He
Yep.
is the kinda guy who I mean, there was a tank derby to be in position to draft him. It was
Yeah.
like, every time when New Orleans won the lottery, it's a celebration. When the Lakers were finally able to pull off the deal to get AD,
Big party.
there's parties in the streets of LA. There were protests in Dallas, and it's not disrespect to Anthony Davis.
No, and he knows
Like,
that.
but logically, Luka is a generational talent who's just entering what should be his prime years, and it's not about, well, this guy's got the potential to be. No, he's proven to be. He is a 5-time first-team All-NBA selection already, and obviously the fans love him and, all that kind of thing, but it's 6 years older, and if you're dumping Luka because you're scared about his durability, AD's obviously had durability issues throughout his career, and Luka was hurt when he made the trade, but so was AD. And then he unfortunately re-aggravated that injury right away after a half that showed you, like, holy smoke,
Oh,
AD is
yeah.
awesome. Like, let's make that. And Max Christie's a nice role player, but for Rob Pelinka to walk away with a pick and a swap in his pocket, Dalton Connect still on the roster, and again, Just the Nico decided that he wanted to trade Luka now, and AD was the guy that he wanted to get. AD's one of his guys. Of all the relationships Nico had with Nike guys over the years, Kobe Bryant was number 1 on the list, as Nico will remind you. AD was probably second. Kyrie was up there, PJ Washington. Nico now has a very clear track record. He wants guys he's been tight with since they've been teenagers, and his relationship with Luka frayed. Now, why did it fray? Okay, maybe Luka's not listening, maybe Luka's being defiant. You're also firing all the guys that he's close with within the organization.
Yeah, why did he do that? Casey Smith, the longtime trainer. There's some other guys. I don't know if Scooter, the longtime PR guy, Scott Tomlin leaving to join Dirk Nowitzki, if that was a part of it. What was that about? Because I saw that, and I think maybe you reported that Lucas said they're getting rid of all the guys that I like.
Yeah.
Why would they have done it, especially Casey Smith?
Well, and Nico wants Nico's guys. I mean, it's a very clear track record here. And, I was told in our report in that final chapter that he fired Casey Smith via Zoom. Casey was back home in Illinois visiting his gravely ill mother, and he fired him via Zoom, or reassigned him because Casey got paid the
He's fired.
contract to go supervise to work from home and do nothing basically. And he told Casey that he was, quote, too negative, which, look, Casey's going to give you his opinion. Casey was part of the advisory committee, the informal advisory committee that recommended the hiring of Jay Kidd and who's a GM that could work with him. Okay, let's go get Nico. I mean, Casey was very tight. Honestly, I had never gotten a real answer why Cuban let that happen, because Cuban still having majority control of the franchise. And then Scott Tomlin, as you mentioned, he left very soon thereafter that. Um, I'll just like Dirk, Scooter, and Casey Smith. I mean, those three are tight. Like when Dirk is just inconsolable in the locker room after the Mavericks finals flop in 2006, it was those three in that locker room until the sun came up the next day. I mean, when I tell you tight, 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 like, look, Dirk, he did this podcast in German with his sister recently, and he mentioned he hadn't been involved with the franchise for 2 years. I I don't think it's you have to connect dots too much to figure out Casey Smith was fired, at the start of that, and that was definitely a domino, and at the time, I thought it was going to be, and I didn't make a big deal out of it last year because I was kinda waiting for things to develop, and then they go on a finals run. I do believe that it was that Scott Tomlin's decision to go work for Dirk on a full-time basis and Dirk's decision to hire him probably were connected to the way that Casey Smith was so, just, uh, unceremoniously dismissed. And then, after the finals run, Jeremy Holzapfel, the highly respected strength coach, Casey Spangler, the massage therapist, these are guys who had been there before Luka. These are guys who Casey, Jeremy, uh, Casey Spangler, Scott Tomlin, these are people who spent as much time with Luka as anybody in the organization. And think about Luka when he got here. I mean, incredible talent, had been a pro for years, but he's a teenage kid.
Yep,
I mean,
still is talented.
massive,
Yep,
massive cultural transition. These are people who were critical to him, not just making the transition to America, but to the NBA. People he liked. These are people he respected. These are people he trusted. And you're replacing his friends with Nico's guys. There's going to be, some tension there. And that's exactly what happened.
So, Tim, Nico Harrison was a guy as a Nike executive who was sought after by other NBA franchises to be a GM for a while. I remember the Spurs made a run at him, I think multiple times. It didn't work out. Cuban bags this guy as the free agent GM to have, the guy who's the relationship GM who can go out and use those contacts and relationships with players and agents and bring them to the Mavericks.
Yep.
That was the idea. And he gets them to the West Finals. It's great. The Jalen Brunson thing doesn't work out. Okay, you can kind of understand it because of the money and because of his dad. And now this happens. How does Nico Harrison, how is he perceived now in the league? And how does he restore his reputation? Because I don't see how he rebounds from this.
Well, and we'll see how it plays out. And look, the Kyrie catastrophic knee injury, that really kills any chance of this thing working out the way that Nico envisioned.
For sure.
We
Yep.
got a very brief glimpse of Nico's vision in that first half against the Houston Rockets.
One half.
That
Yeah,
was
one half.
with Derek Lively healthy. Kyrie playing with the biggest, most athletic front court in the league. That's 3 to 4 year time frame that Nico envisioned, which look, that's a whole nother conversation about the logic of that with the picks that you owed, that you paid to put together a contender around Luka. Like, again, I'm just telling you what the man said.
Yeah.
You understand the flaws of that logic. Now, going back to Jalen Brunson, I put that one on Cuban.
So did I.
That was a Mark Cuban mistake from literally the time Cuban and Donnie screwed up on the original contract. So Brunson would be an unrestricted free agent instead of restricted. They messed up the minutia on that. When Leon Rose, Brunson's agent at the time and his godfather, who turned into the Knicks president, negotiated his rookie deal with the Mavericks. But they could have extended him. They could have extended him that summer. They could have extended him in January. They wanted to wait. They didn't believe in Brunson. And look, did any of us think Brunson was going to be an all NBA player? Did you think he was going to be on MVP ballots? No. But even going into that summer, as Rick Brunson told me, make it hard. You didn't. You made it easy. The Mavericks didn't try to outbid him. After all that talk, we got his bird rights. You thought 4 years for 104 was a massive overpay. You didn't try to make him an offer he couldn't refuse. So that was a Cuban decision. And frankly, if you look at Nico Harrison's track record going into this trade deadline, which is what's the line about the play in Mrs. Lincoln? But yeah, but seriously, like, hey, was he perfect? No, but dude, he did put together a finals team around Luka. He managed to, despite how glum things looked, a a year before that, put together a team and a supporting cast that fit around Luka. Like the tanking decision, which was an organizational decision. I know J Kidd does a real good job of pretending like he's just an employee. Trust me.
No, I love that.
J
Yeah.
Kidd to Nico to Cuban, everybody was on board with that latest
Yeah.
tank, and it paid off. You got Derek Lively the second, a perfect young big to pair with Luka. Then you went out PJ Washington. I didn't think that was a good trade. He was a phenomenal fit.
It worked out great.
And
In that role, he thrived.
tag team, the Kyrie
Yep.
deal.
Gafford.
The Kyrie deal worked out perfectly, and
Yep.
the chemistry with him and Luka ended up being awesome. So, like, all in all, Nico's done a good job until he made a decision that was a complete reversal of everything that they had done to that point, a total, change of direction, and I've actually been standing with executives in the NBA courtside, after the trade. I was standing with I won't say the team or who it was, but and Nico walked by, and the guy said, "Hey, Nico, I admire your courage." Now, Nico left us he was like, "But there's no way in hell I would have made that trade." But I tell
So
what will be very interesting is kinda to monitor, Nico's standing with Patrick Dumont. Patrick Dumont has given Nico complete control, and, as Cuban recently said, I forgot where he was talking, but Dumont's way of operating this franchise is "In Nico we trust." I don't think Dumont had any idea about the financial ramifications of this trade. You think 350, 345,000,000 was gonna be a bad investment with Luka? I'm telling you, just in terms of revenue, this trade is gonna cost the Mavericks a hell of a lot more than that.
Oh, I'm thinking about their ability because now they want a new building, and you and I've seen this time and again. If you've got a winning team, you got a chance to stir up voters and pass bonds and city tax increases and whatever else for a new building. If they're bad, and memories are short, but this one seems like it's going to be different. But in Texas has never voted down one of these. San Antonio, Austin, any of them. We cannot give sports teams enough of our money for sports venues. It's not like it's incredible, but on this one, I'm like, if you're bad, I
Well,
don't like this. That's the one that I'm like, I don't think they thought about that one at
and
all.
and the problem is you've betrayed your fan base because look, man, this is a fan base that was raised on Dirk. Loyalty never fades away. 21 letters that sums up 21 years of just absolute loyalty both ways. And again, you can talk about the flaws that Luca has, and I've covered them and people have gotten mad at me for it. The guy's loyal. He wanted to be in Dallas. He wanted to spend his entire career here. He was sitting right behind Dirk for most of that statue ceremony. And when Dirk's sitting over to the side, if you look, Luka is right over his left shoulder, plotting everything, admiring him. He didn't take after Dirk's diet and conditioning. He didn't take after Dirk's, way of being like this super eloquent franchise spokesman. But man, he wanted to take after Dirk of being the guy who stayed here his whole career, who won championships in Dallas. That's a cool statue. I'd like to have one right over there. Nowitzki Way, how about an intersection, Nowitzki Way, Drive? Like all these things were goals of Luka's plans for Luka. And he never saw this coming. He was shocked. He was heartbroken by this deal. Now, they didn't ship him to Siberia. And I just came back from LA. Luka's got his joy back. And I think,
Yeah,
that sunshine and,
the beach.
playing for JJ Redick, his buddy, playing with LeBron, his idol. He's back with Dodo, Dorian Finney-Smith. Like, there's a lot of great things that can come with being a superstar for the Los Angeles Lakers. Luka's going to be just fine. I'm not sure that the Mavericks fan base is recovering from this anytime soon. And the outrage, I think, is turning into apathy, and apathy is something that's hard to turn around.
So I'll ask you last thing. I kept you way too long, but I need you to look into your magic 8 ball, your crystal ball, Tim. What would you guess the next 5 years? Because to me, this was a 5-year thing about Luka. I compared him. If your concerns about Luka were like he was going to age like James Harden, who for whom conditioning has not been a huge priority, he crashed at around 30. But from 25 to 29, he was an MVP caliber player. And that's what I kind of saw Luka as if he didn't improve the conditioning. So let's just sort of say that's worst case scenario, that he ages like James Harden. Whatever sin that
Pretty
is.
damn good career he's had.
Damn right. Damn right. So if you had to guess, what happens to the Mavericks now and what happens to the Lakers now?
I mean, look, I do think the Mavericks were going to have a chance to be contenders in the short-term future. This Kyrie injury is really tough. I mean, forget about this year. I don't know how much time he's gonna miss next year. I don't know when or if he's gonna be able to return. I know the guy's work ethic. He's gonna do everything he can, but it's tough. It's tough. But again, that's what's so crazy about, well, there's a lot of things that are so crazy about this, but the long term, God, it's a bleak outlook. You gave up control of your first round picks in 27, 28, 29, and you're telling me there's a 3 to 4 year time frame in 2025. I'm I'm not real good at math. I can figure that out. So this time frame ends as you're building around 2 first ballot Hall of Famers in their 30s. And then what? Oh, 28, Oklahoma City's got unprotected swap rights with you. 29, that pick now belongs to the Houston Rockets. It's unprotected. 30, oh, the San Antonio Spurs have unprotected swap rights. So just as the downfall of the Dallas Mavericks logically will begin, the real downfall, your closest geographical rivals stand to benefit. I mean, what?
I can't believe it.
So,
Who looks worse in this book, Nico Harrison or Rick Carlisle?
oh, I mean, the last chapter is obviously tough on Nico. How could it not be? Look, Rick's relationship with Luka was not good, and Rick screwed it up very early on. Rick also, to his credit, very early on recognized just what a special talent this guy was and gave him the keys and built an offense completely to,
Around him, yeah.
you know, to put this guy in a position to dominate. And it's how crazy is it now that there were a lot of questions in the league about whether Luka could be a primary ball handler.
God.
Like, dude,
Like, how bad did these guys miss on that guy?
an executive with a high pick in the lottery from another team told me that his comp for Luka was Hito Turkoglu. Good player.
Yeah, really good
Luka's
player.
rookie year was better than any season.
All right. Tim, tell people where they can find the book, please.
Yeah, but anywhere that you order books, your bookstores, Amazon, it's pinned on top of my Twitter profile. Don't read the comments; they're not very nice.
Is there any place where they can go where you get the majority of the money as opposed to Amazon or any place like that?
I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm not real good at reading fine print like Donnie and Mark Cuban. The minutia gets by me, so just order the book. I hope you enjoy it. Don't worry about it anywhere, just wherever you can find it.
You and I've known each other a long time, and I don't think I've ever said this, but I have always had a tremendous amount, legitimately, of respect and admiration for you, for your willingness and consistent courage to speak the truth. That's really hard, especially in this day and age with the platforms that you have certainly earned the spots to be elevated on, whether it's a podcast with Brian Windhorst or ESPN or any of these other places. you do a phenomenal job. And I have such respect for that because I know how hard it is to sit there in press conferences where people are calling you out, whether it's a guy like Luka Doncic, and then certainly on social media when you get, destroyed. You never once waver from the truth. And it's the reason why you are where you are. You're a great pro. And I'm really happy for you that the timing of this all, even though it sucks for the Mavericks and Mavericks fans, it certainly worked out for you, and I'm really happy for you. Congratulations on all your success. I know you've got a great family, and they're obviously that's a priority for you, and I'm really happy for you. So thank you so much for making the time for me today. I know it took a lot of it, but it was great, and congratulations on the book.
Well, Mac, I really appreciate it. Really enjoyed this conversation. And
Thank you.
I would say all that praise you just heaped on me, it takes one to know one.
That's very kind of you. All right, Tim, thanks a lot. See you down the road.
I appreciate it, Mac.
Take care. Too.
This is a Stolen Water Media production.